In this video, I'm going to show you how to combine two very popular libraries that honestly don't even need to be combined together because they're so powerful they can be used completely independently. But if you want to do it, you definitely can, although I would caution you that there's a right way to do it and there's a wrong way to do it, and unfortunately many developers fall in the latter category. But I can promise you, if you watch this video and you watch it until the end, you are not going to be one of those developers and you're going to properly know how to combine React Query with Zustand. Let's get into it. But actually before that, I just want to mention that if you want to learn how to build a big and complex application with React as a total beginner with literally no prior experience required, check out Project React. It'll be the first link in the description. I promise you, you will not regret it. Now, let's get into it. All right, cool. So let's begin. So here in front of us, we have not a simple application. This is actually even more bare bones than that. It's a pretty much empty application, and our responsibility is going to be to set some patterns here that could potentially be used for the future if we were to take this as working within a team on an actual project. So this is a really important responsibility, and we want to make sure that we do it right. So let's imagine that we're actually working at a job right now, and we're given the task to figure out how to efficiently combine React Query with Zustand in our application and actually make a proof of concept that makes sense, that is efficient, and that we can then start applying across all of our components, across all of our application, because it is better than something else perhaps. And all that we have to do that is this beautiful app component, which as you can see is totally empty. And we also have this user API over here, which is just a function that once again is trying to mimic a backend. It's simulating a backend. This one will essentially receive here optional filters, which can have some limit and a page property. And then let's just assume that it would do something cool with those filters, like actually filter the data. But because we don't have data, we don't have a backend, we don't have anything to filter with, then it is going to await an empty promise for 1 second. And then it's just going to return an array of one user, and that is going to be me. That's me. I'm ID number 1 and I'm named Darius, and that is going to be of type user. And as you can see here, this is a pretty simple type. Any user just has an ID property and then has a name property, and that's it. So how do we combine React Query with Zustand? Well, before thinking about that, we actually need something to combine, right? So I think it would make sense for us to set up all of the code required for React Query to run and display that single user, or technically users, and then take it from there. Once we have that, we're going to be able to think a little bit more clearly about how we can add Zustand into the mix. So I'm going to come here inside of the app component, and we're going to use the traditional use query hook. So we're going to do const data, and then that's going to be equal to use query. We're going to import this from tanstack at React Query. Then we're going to give this an object. The query key is going to be an array and then users like this. And then query function is going to be our, what is it called over here? I think it's get users. There we go, get users. We're going to import this from our API. And then over here, we're going to have to call this as a function because this does expect filters that are optional, so that, you know, we have to call it this way. And then with this, all that we have to do is come here to our actual UI, to our JSX, and actually make use of those users. And let's see, can Copilot figure it out? There you go, it can. We're just going to map over the data over here because it is an optional, because React Query on first render, this is going to be optional. I mean, it's going to be undefined, right? So that's what optional means. We're going to put a question mark over here, and then we're going to map over all of the users. And then for every user, we're just going to return a div over here with the user.id as a key, and then username, and that's it. So now if you go to our application, this is what this looks like. Let me just zoom in a little bit so that you can see. If we refresh, we actually don't get the user for a little bit, for a second, actually, while it's being fetched from the backend. And then we have our list of users over here, which again, just has my user. We're only returning one hard-coded user from React Query from our actual fetch request. So now, how do we add Zustand into the mix, right? Because we have React Query, it's doing all of the fetching. We have our data over here, which is actually going to be users. How do we convert that to Zustand and actually put all of those users in Zustand? Or how do we just add Zustand into this mix? What can we do with Zustand that would make sense over here for us to actually use in this project? And now I'm going to spoil it for you and tell you that there's actually two ways that you can approach this. One is the very naive way, which is actually the wrong way, and you're actually doing a lot of extra work for nothing. And then there's the right way, the correct way to do things. In this video, I'm going to show you both, and we're first going to start with the naive approach, the one that is wrong. So let's do it. Let's add Zustand into the mix, and let's do it the wrong way. So we're going to come here to our sidebar. We have a state folder over here, which we can use. I'm going to create here a new file, and I'm going to put this user store.ts like this. We're going to create all of our Zustand state for the user inside of this store. So as usual, first, because we're working in TypeScript, we're going to start by defining the actual type of our store. So we're going to come here and do type and then user store, and that is going to be equal to an object over here. And now in here, we can actually decide whatever that we want to put. So because this is the user store, we're probably going to want to have an array of users just like we had in React Query. So we're going to do users like this, and this is going to be an array of user, which we can import from our types folder. And then because we have a piece of state called users inside of our store, we actually also need a function to be able to set those users inside of the store. So we're going to come here and do set users, and that is going to be a function that, let's see, Copilot, it is not responding right now. There we go. It's going to receive an array of users, and then it's going to return void. We're going to use that to actually set those users in the store. So we're going to come here and then do export const use user store, and the reason we're putting use over here is because this is going to get used as a custom hook, and custom hooks have to follow the rules of hooks in React, which means that they have to start with the keyword use. And then we're going to actually let Copilot do all of the work, because this is simple enough that it can understand what actually it is doing. So let's import here this create function from Zustand like this, and now everything should be fine. We have our use user store. We're giving it the actual type, so it knows what types or what store is going to have. And then we're also using the set function over here. And then we're creating our main piece of state over here. We're initiating users as an empty array. And then the set users function, it's just going to use the set function over here. Whatever users it receives, it's going to set it here in the state. And there we go, we have our store. And now with this, we can actually come back here to our app component, and we can use that store to actually get access to our users. So we can come here to the app component at the top, make a little bit of space, and then we can do const and then users. And that is going to be equal to use user store, and we can import this directly from state/user store. Now we have the users over here. We're also going to want to access the set users function, because we're going to need to update those users with, I guess, the values that are returned from React Query, right? That's the only thing that we have. So that's what we're going to use. Now, to actually get the data from React Query into Zustand, how do we do it? Well, React Query in the past, and maybe today, depending on the version that you're using, used to have something like this called onSuccess, which you could pass a callback so that whenever this query is actually resulted in a success, you would have access to this data, and then we could use that to actually update our users. Currently, in the new version of React Query, this has been deprecated, so we're going to have to go with a traditional use effect. So we're going to come here and do use effect. We're going to import this from React. We're going to have this be a function. We're going to pass here as the dependency array, we're going to pass data, and then we're just going to do if data, then set users to data, right? That's it. And then finally, because our data is now into users, right, we're going to have to change this to users, and we're going to actually be able to remove the question mark, because users is anyways going to be an array. It's just a question of does it have any elements in it or not, but for that we don't need to have a question mark. And I mean, that's it, right? We've now successfully connected React Query through this use effect over here to Zustand, and then we're using the actual values from the Zustand store to actually render out our actual UI. And if you go here to our application, you're going to see that it works. We still have the same value, the same user, my user, just like we had it before. And even if I refresh, we're going to get the same behavior. We're not going to see it for a second. And then once it's ready, once the fetch is completed, we're going to see that is over here. This is my user. So this works. Now, I really hope that by now you realize that although this works and this is technically functional, so it is working, there's no bugs in here, this is really inefficient, and this is the wrong way to do things. This is the wrong way to combine Zustand with React Query. And actually what we've done here is we've duplicated a lot of code, and we've added actually a lot of complexity to our app that we didn't need to add at all. Because if you think about it, our users now, the actual array of users, are now stored in two places. We have it here in the users, but then we also still have it in this data property over here. It's not because we just set it here and actually put it inside of the Zustand store that it's no longer going to be inside of the data over here. I can actually come here and then do data, and then we're going to have to put the question mark because of React Query. This is still going to work exactly in the same way as we had it before, even if we're not using the actual users from the Zustand store. And actually, we didn't even need to do all of this to put this data from React Query inside of Zustand, because again, we already have it here inside of React Query. Doing what we did just now is actually duplicating our code, and is duplicating our data in two separate places that we have to manage. That's inefficient. And the reason for that, and this I've actually talked about it in a previous video, so if you haven't seen that, is that React Query is not just a data fetching library. Even though most developers only use it for that, at its core, it's not a data fetching library. It is very good for data fetching, but it's not a data fetching library. It's an asynchronous state management solution that again happens to fit well with the fact of fetching data, because fetching data is an asynchronous operation. But React Query is more than just fetching data. It has all of the magic with the caching data, right? That acts as an actual state management solution. Every time that this query function actually gets called, whatever gets returned by this query function automatically gets put in the React Query cache, so that if you try to access this from another component or some other place, it's going to return to you the cached version instead of making a fetch from scratch once again. That's what React Query does. So really, React Query actually is a state management solution. It's just an asynchronous state management solution, which means that we could have done all of this, and in fact we did initially at the beginning, without ever using Zustand, right? So the fact that we added Zustand in here just adds another layer of complexity unnecessarily, and this is not the way to build our project. This is not the pattern that we want to provide to our make-believe team that we're working on for this video. We need to do better. We need to do something else. And that something else has to do with another very important piece that we have in this component that we haven't talked about. In this component, we actually have two very different kinds of data, two very different kinds of state. We have something that we call server state, and then we have something that we call client state. Although technically I should specify right now in this configuration, our client state does not exist because everything that we have here is actually server state. I'm going to explain in just a second what those two different means. But again, we have server state and then we have client state. So server state, if you go here back to our API function, server state is any state that comes and belongs on the server, right? So for example, our database is server state, right? Our database is state. It's things that can be updated, that can change over time, and we can use that to actually read values and send back to our front end. But our front end doesn't manage our database. Our front end doesn't directly talk to the database. It instead talks to the back end, to the server, and the server manages the state of the database. So this over here, what we're returning, and this entire file really is server state, right? This is state that belongs on the server, not on the client. And now going back here to the app component, you have to understand that React Query is a server state solution. Asynchronous state management means server, means asynchronous operations. Zustand, on the other hand, is client state solution. Zustand is good at, and it's only good at managing client state, state that belongs on the client, on the browser, that lives in your React application, not that lives on the server. And what we've done here is we've actually put server state inside of Zustand, and that's why we duplicated ourselves, because we already had that by default with React Query, right? The server state, again, is this user over here that lives on the server. The client doesn't know about the user until the server gives the client, hey, this is the user that we have. And then we've taken that user, we've put it through here in React Query, as we should, because React Query is a server, asynchronous state management solution. But then we've also added the extra step to put that server state inside of Zustand. And again, we shouldn't have done this. React Query was good enough for the job, and doing it in Zustand was unnecessary. Zustand is only good for client state. So now, what is client state? Well, currently we don't have any client state, right? But we have a hint as to what could be client state and what we can actually use to make changes to our store to convert this to work with client state instead of server state. And that is going to be these filters over here. We have a filter for the limit, we have a filter for the page, and these, although they do get sent to this get users function and then hypothetically would be used to actually filter out the data, the state of those filters, what page are we currently on, what's the current limit that we're trying to fetch, right? How many per page, that state lives on the client. That is client state. And in this case, in our application, this is the only client state that we have. And so if we come back here to React Query being server state and Zustand being client state, the only logical thing for us to do, and really the only thing that we can do that would make any sort of sense, is to use Zustand for the client state for these filters over here, and then let React Query do all of this magic with the server state, with the actual users that are returned for the backend. That's the only thing that we can do. And actually now we're going to do it just so I can show you how this makes much more sense when you do it this way, as opposed to how we were doing it just now previously. So now let's do that. And let's update our user store to make use of client state instead of server state. So first we're going to remove anything that has to do with users, because once again, users is server state. So all of this gets completely removed. We're not going to need it. Now what we're going to want to do is actually have our filters over here. So what I want to do is just actually export this type, because we're going to want to use it inside of the user store. I'm going to have here filters. and that is going to be, let's see, get users filters. We're going to import this from API/user. Now, I do want to mention that in a real application, you will probably not want to directly import the filters of this actual function. You would maybe want to define them here, but for simplicity, I'm just doing it this way so that we can just get directly the type over here inside of the user store without having to create any other complexity. And then again, because we have filters over here, we now also need a function to set the filter. So we can do set filters, and let's see, can Copilot get it for us? It can, right? So we have filters and then get users filters. And actually what I'm going to do is, I believe, yes, I'm going to make these as optional because we're going to want to set these as undefined, and actually not like this. This should be optional. We're going to set this as undefined, the filters, because chances are we're not always going to have applicable filters. Sometimes we just want to have no filters and get all of the users from the backend. And then once we have the filters, we can come here and actually remove all of this code about the users. And let's see if Copilot knows. It can. There we go. We have filters, which gets initialized to undefined, right? So initially we're going to have no filters. And then we have the similar, actually the same function, but just for filters instead of user, that is going to receive some filters and then just set them in the actual state like this. And we are good to go. That is the only change that we need to make to our user store to actually now have it be only focused with client state instead of server state. And then inside of the app component, well, what we have to do is first of all, get rid of anything that is users related to the actual user store and actually just access the filters like this, right? We're just going to access the filters from the use user store. Then we actually don't need this use effect anymore. We can just remove it because our server state, our actual users, again, are going to live exclusively in React Query. And finally, because our getUsers function, again, optionally receives here these filters, we can actually pass them directly to it by doing this. Filters like this, filters, there we go. And because these are exactly the same type, right, that's why we imported the type, this is going to work automatically without having to do anything else and create anything else. And finally, because we are working with React Query, we want to have its caching magic be working as we expect. So we also want to pass the filters here as an object. And actually, I believe we should pass it like this because filters is already an object. There we go. And finally, we can come here, we can remove the use effect. We no longer need it. And now we've combined React Query with Zustand in an efficient way, using both libraries for what they're good at and not having them overlap with each other, right? We've used here Zustand for the client state for the filters. So now these filters will only ever live on the client. The client will be able to update the filters, set the page, set the limit. And when those change, they're going to get sent over here to React Query. And then React Query is going to use those to actually get a new list of users. Again, imagine that we're actually using the filters, and that filtered list of users is going to update here inside of data, and we're going to see it directly on the screen updated, right? This is the correct way to use Zustand and React Query together, and not the way that we did it previously. And really, the benefit of doing it this way is super great, because now these filters can be independently controlled and managed by the client. React Query doesn't do anything with the filters besides receive them and just send them over to the backend and let the backend deal with them. And now React Query can focus on what it's good at, and Zustand can focus on what it's good at. And actually, right now, we're actually not setting the filters anywhere. But if we were to set the filters, we could come here and perhaps make a new component, function, filters, component. That is going to be a function, right? And here, we're going to take this use user store, right? We're going to put it inside of this component. Instead of filters, we're going to set filters. And here, let's again use the power of imagination. And let's imagine that some form inputs here that would actually call the set filters function and update the filters. So now we have another component. Maybe we put it over here, filter component like this. We have another component. Why is this giving an error? Oh, because it has to return something. Will this work? There we go. We can just return null. There we go. We have another component, the filter component, right? Again, this uses independently the Zustand store, the client state, to access the set filters function. We'll then use that function to hypothetically update the filters. Those will get updated here inside of this component, inside of this filters, and get passed to React Query. And React Query is going to do the same thing that it's always done, be very efficient at fetching your data and managing your asynchronous state, right? And this makes sense. This is efficient. And once again, we're following proper design patterns over here. Everything has its own responsibility. Everything is clear. There's no misunderstandings. And there's a clear pattern that emerges here that we can come now. And again, with the example of being hypothetically at a job, we can present this to our team and say, hey, this is the way that we should be using Zustand with React Query. These are the problems. These are the fallbacks that you have to watch out for. But if you do it this way, and if you explain all the server and client stuff together, the state management, that everything makes sense. Everything works together really really nicely and nothing overlaps each other, and you're getting the best results, the best simplicity, and the best outcome for the project, for the team, and for yourself as a developer. So really, I highly recommend that you spend as much time as you need to really try to understand this fundamentally, because this is really important, and it's so easy to do it the wrong way and to duplicate code and to make your life a living nightmare. I mean, you saw how much, even though in a simple application that we had, the fact that we literally duplicated everything that we had 2 arrays of users, and who knows the amount of bugs that could have produced even in our simple application. And dare I not think about a more complex application where we had the same pattern in multiple components. That would be a nightmare, and I don't want that, and I don't want that for you either. So please take the time, study this video, and really make sure that you understand it. And if you want, you can actually access the code, you can clone it on your machine and play around with it. There'll be a link to the GitHub repository in the description. I highly recommend that you check it out. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more videos just like this one, make sure to leave this video a big thumbs up. You can also click here to subscribe, or you can click here to watch a different video of mine that YouTube seems to think that you're really going to enjoy. And with that being said, my name has been Darius Kozden. This is Kozden Solutions. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Ciao, ciao.